Welcome back to Defense News Weekly. When a military general or admiral breaks the law or commits any other corrupt act, it has an outsized effect given their high rank in the military structure. In a new book, Generals and Admirals, Criminals and Crooks, Dishonorable Leadership in the U.S. Military, author Jeffrey Matthews looks at some of the most egregious examples of failings by U.S. military flag ranks. And while these cases are a fraction of leadership, Matthews' book shows us which lessons can be gleaned by such failures. Navy Times editor Jeff Zazulowicz brings us more.
We're joined now by Dr. Jeffrey Matthews. He's the George F. Jewett Distinguished Professor at the School of Business and Leadership at the University of Puget Sound in Tacoma, Washington. He's also the author of the book Generals and Admirals, Criminals and Crooks, Dishonorable Leadership in the U.S. Military. It's part history lesson, part categorization of all the times that U.S. military flag officers have failed to live up to their standards over the years. Dr. Matthews, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here, Jeff. Thanks for the invitation.
If you would, take us through the genesis of the book and how the idea to write about this came to you.
Yeah, so it really started around 2017. I really remember vividly reading a newspaper article in USA Today, and it was reporting on a Pentagon Inspector General report. And it basically said over the course of a 4-year period, that some 400 or 500 senior Pentagon leaders, civilian and military, had been punished for misconduct of one kind or another. And I was just thunderstruck by the number that many officers and senior civilians could have been penalized for misconduct, misbehavior of some kind. And so as I was kind of got on my radar there, and then I noticed on a month-by-month basis, there seemed to be a flag officer, a general or an admiral, who was getting fired from their position or being punished in one way or another. And it was a steady stream of misconduct. And I just thought, how is this happening within our military that our senior leaders are getting into trouble in terms of just the sheer quantity?
Sure. You note in the book's introduction that the vast majority of flag officers serve their country, with duty and honor as befits their position. Tell us a bit about, why you think it's important to understand, the bad apples that don't live up to that standard.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I do. And I always try to make the point in talking to audiences that I believe that 99% of our generals and admirals are very honorable people. This book is not about them. This book is about the 1%ers. And I really don't like to think about it as just being bad apples, because what I really was able to find out was historically there's been a problem, contemporarily there's been a problem, and the problem continues to this day. We have a general on court-martial this week in a trial in Texas. And 3 weeks ago, we had a 4-star admiral who was indicted for corruption, and the problem's ongoing. And so one of the points I like to try to make is if 1% of our ships went aground every year, and 1% of our airplanes crashed every year, and 1% of our tanks, caught fire every year, there would be some massive investigations within the military to see what this problem is because the problem is systemic in some way, even though it's only a 1%. Still, 1% is a pretty big number when you think about the number, in this case, of generals and admirals that we have.
As you look at the modern day military, what is your thought or theory about, why flag officers kind of choose to go dirty, so to speak? Is there anything within the system that is failing? Are these individuals who kind of get into that, absolute power corrupts absolutely type paradigm? Everybody's been kind of saying yes to them forever, and they develop a sense of entitlement. Where do you think kind of the modern day seeds of this lie, and do they lie in more than one place?
They do. I don't think it's, it is the question. And I think the answers, there are multiple answers to it. A couple of thoughts that I have is, for some of these officers, flag officers, that they've had kind of corrupted character from the beginning. And so it's only over time, and they accumulate more power, that then it becomes a problem kind of in a broader, more impactful level as they gain rank. And so there's a question is, do we have a problem in our promotion system that is not identifying these people who maybe have corrupted character from the beginning? For other officers, I would say that it's more situational in its kind of development. So someone can serve honorably for the majority of their career, but then they find themselves in a corruptive situation of which they allow themselves to be corruptive. And so in those two examples, I would say in categories. And then a third thing I also like to point out is I think sometimes what happens, and I can give a modern day example of this, is we can have within the branches, within the services, subcultures that develop over time. And these subcultures, maybe they start, the seeds of it is there's some misbehavior within a particular unit or area, and it's tolerated. But this misbehavior is tolerated. Over time, it becomes kind of normal that this behavior is almost to be expected. But then over further time, it becomes expected. Right, encouraged by the leadership. And so in the Navy, there's been both the examples of tailhook, where I think this happened in the subculture of the aviation community for the Navy and the Marines, which led to tailhook, 91, the disaster there. And then also modern day in the Fat Leonard scandal, right, which is in terms of our 7th Fleet, right, in the Pacific. I think you also had this subculture also develop, right? We didn't have a comparable problem in the Atlantic, for example. And so I think if we look at those three major factors goes a long way, Jeff, I think, in explaining some people have corrupt characters to begin with. Some people have strong ethical foundations, but get corrupted over time or in particular circumstances, or we allow subcultures to develop that are characteristically problematic in that way.